And I've had some significant Wi-Fi issues, so if I do lose you, then give me a few moments to come back on, and if I don't, just close out the show.
No problem. I'm connecting via Elon Musk's wonderful system at the moment.
Thank God. One of my
Yeah.
favorite South Africans besides you, Jonathan.
Yeah, he is good.
Yeah, he is great. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Those that will be listening to the podcast later to come. My name is Rich Brown. I'm joined this morning by Mr. Jonathan Deal of 0 Points Down Academy over there in beautiful South Africa. Before we get going here, click the links in today's show notes. We're going to have links to Jonathan's point-by-point critique, and I won't steal the thunder on that. I'll let Jonathan do that. But looking very, very forward to talking to Jonathan. It's been about 8 or 9 months, I think, since our last conversation.
Yeah.
Let me go ahead and read Jonathan's very impressive bio. Mr. Deal is the founder and owner of 0 Points Down Academy in South Africa. 0 Points Down is a premier academy presenting government-certified training for all civilian firearm platforms, as well as training tactical and anti-poaching teams. The academy has developed a reputation for effective sport shooting training. Deal founded and is current CEO of SafeCitizen, an organization focused on community safety. In 2024, Mr. Deal is a co-founder of the BST Challenge, which is the Blood, Sweat, and Tears Challenge. It's a very unique event, loosely modeled on the tactical games here in the United States. The event is presented on the grounds of 0 Points Down Academy, a 10,000-acre ranch in the semi-desert region of Karoo. In September, Deal completed a 3-month critical review on the public advisory around guns issued by the United States Surgeon General. Mr. Deal is happiest when he is pressing the trigger or talking on anti-gun groups. Mr. Deal is a passionate advocate for universal private gun ownership in lawful and competent hands. And my good friend, Mr. Mike Seeklander, although he may not know it, has been a significant influence on Mr. Deal's teaching and instruction techniques. Good morning, sir.
Thanks, Rich. Great to be with you guys. And greetings to everyone that's tuned in and watching the Coffee with Rich. I think the first thing that I'd like to do is outline our talk and some of where I think we're going to go. And it's all around guns and the community, civilian reaction to guns, the attitude to guns around the world, the global anti-gun agendas, and what lawful and concerned gun owners can do about it.
Jonathan, before we get started, can I ask just a preliminary question?
Sure.
Why to do this critique of the United States Surgeon General's report on guns?
Very simply because coming from the office of the U.S. Surgeon General, being couched or labeled under the banner of public health emergency or public health crisis, makes it a very important document. And it needed to be firstly studied, and the more that I studied it, the more I became convinced that it needed to be refuted. Why is it important to me in South Africa? First of all, because I have a great, if tenuous, connection with the people in America that love guns and that enjoy shooting. But more importantly, a report like this will be used by anti-gun groups around the world, and it needs to be put in its place. So it's been done. It's on the record here in this country. It has already been distributed to the chairman of the Police Portfolio Committee in South Africa, mentioning to him that if it is raised at any point in time, and I'm talking about the U.S. Surgeon General's claims, here is the document to refute it, and that we will bring it to their attention at that time. So that's why it was so important, and why it's important in America as well. The U.S. Surgeon General is a political appointee. This particular Surgeon General was directly appointed by President Biden. He was the U.S. Surgeon General when President Trump was elected, and President Trump promptly dismissed him, and President Biden promptly reinstated him. So it's a high-level political appointment, needs to be taken seriously.
Now, well said, Jonathan.
Thank you. And that's what the report means, basically, to to people that are concerned about ownership of firearms. I created a fact sheet. So what this is about, and any of your listeners or viewers can go after the time, and I'm sure that you'll share the link with them, to this review that I've done. It runs about 70 pages, and it really drills down into their report in great detail. The National Rifle Association, on their law section, did something similar, but I don't think that they went into enough depth to properly refute the things. And I did a fact sheet on the second page of this review, and these are some of the critical things. The U.S. Surgeon General Public Advisory on Gun Violence represents a massive fraud on the American people. Not a single statistic bears relevance to the facts. The founding poll, which is the underlying document on which the advisory is based, is biased against guns from the get-go. The question formats in that poll were manipulated to produce anti-gun statistics and claims. The document itself presents contradictions even amongst anti-gun groups. And at the end of the day, if one looks at this report in its totality, the false claims endanger the lives of law-abiding Americans should the US government start defining gun policy based on a report like this. The result can be that it can endanger the lives of law-abiding Americans by curtailing firearm ownership rights. And then I have put just an aside there, the numbers in the advisory are inaccurate to the degree of being irrelevant. Not a single statistic quoted in the poll and neatly transcribed into easy ratios for the public bears any resemblance with the reality of US experiences. So, Rich, that's where we are, and I intend to spend a few minutes drilling down into just a few examples in the document, but I'd like to first give you an opportunity to ask questions or whatever you want to say.
No, there's two that leap to mind. Number one, I know that you're a strong advocate, as am I, for universal gun ownership in competent, et cetera, hands. I mean, there's some qualifiers to that universal gun ownership, but why do you think a civilization such as yours in South Africa or mine here in the United States or anywhere in the world, why is that such a pivotal issue for you? Why have you chosen to take up that mantle? Let's start there.
I think it goes to the absolute root of human rights. And from the days of cavemen, human beings and cavemen, for that matter, have had a right to defend themselves and protect themselves. And Chuck Norris and Jean-Claude Van Damme and Bruce Lee might be very impressive on the big screen, but there are very few of us that can defend themselves against a concerted attack from a number of people. That is really just something for Hollywood. We have situations in this country. You are increasingly seeing situations in the United States with people entering your communities that have never been part of the community, that don't share anything common with that community, creating extremely dangerous situations where there are force multipliers that just take a law-abiding citizen who wants nothing more than to protect his family on the road or in their own yard, take it right out of his hands and put him into an extremely dangerous situation. And it's an absolute fact, as probably everybody listening to this broadcast knows, that the only thing that can properly balance the stakes or in that type of situation is a firearm. In general, unless you are a really, really very experienced person with some other sharp or blunt weapon. Firearms,
No, that's
yeah.
I think, it is the great equalizer, and I agree with you. If self-defense isn't a universal human right, then what do we have here? Just absolute tyranny, unchecked. The second question I wanted to ask you, Jonathan, and maybe this will tee it up for you, is You were your initial critique was you really slammed the stats and the numbers and the way they were presented. Can you give me an anecdote or two as to what you're referring to in the report?
Yeah, let me go directly to one that I pulled out here. One of the material claims is, and so the U.S. Surgeon General puts out a whole bunch of things like people that have been exposed to a firearm-related incident. They might have been involved in one. They might have been held up in a robbery. They might have seen somebody else shot. They might have been shot. They might have shot somebody else. All sorts of various scenarios that they sketched. But he takes a globular amount. He says 54% of Americans have experienced gun-related violence, injury, or death. 54%. In other words, if you walk into a Walmart on a Sunday morning and there are 500 people in there, the average person is going to look around and think, wow, more than 250 people inside this store have experienced a violent firearm event. It's complete and utter nonsense. To break it down, and I'll go through this once. The US population in 2023 was 340 million people. The average family is 2.82 persons, and 66% of that family, which represents 2 adults, is 1.87 adults per family. If you extrapolate the figures of 54%, they're talking about 122,276,000 adults who have experienced an incident related to a firearm. Now, they're silent on the period in time. So I thought, well, it has to be in the lifetime. So I looked at the lifetime of Americans. It's 76.2 years at the moment, according to government stats. Subtract 18 years from that because we're talking about adults. So we're excluding anybody under 18. It gives us a lifetime of 58.1 years. And that, working through the statistics on that, it tells us that 5,765 adults in America have experienced a firearm-related incident every single day for the last 58.1 years. It's obviously completely and utterly impossible. And just that one statistic, drilling down, shows what a complete and utter lie it is. They based their whole thing on 1,278 people in America. And then they took about a quarter of those and they skewed the statistics to specifically select colored people from communities like Chicago, where there was very high statistics on violence and gang-related activity. So even so that gives you an idea of how these things come about. How can 1,278 people under those circumstances represent the population of America from the East Coast to the West Coast and all of the different communities and lifestyles in between? Absolutely impossible. So
yeah, that's
the one.
Me and Seeklander did like a 2.5 hour show on I think it was mass shootings, myths, and stuff. And we published a paper and put it out there on the internet for those that wanted to get the facts. And some of these ones, Jonathan, like there's one that tracks all the school shootings, and it's like there's hundreds of millions occurring every day. I mean, it was just stupid stats. But when you dig into it, it's like if a gunshot was heard by any one person on the school grounds, that was a gun related thing. If a parent walked onto the property to get his child and he was lawfully carrying a concealed firearm, it was, I mean, at some point the numbers are meaningless if you're going to lie with stats at that level, you know?
Yeah. So that's a very important point that you made, because the way that they look at it, they talk about, they make a big claim that guns are killing more children in America than automobiles.
Mm-hmm.
The interesting thing is that they are counting people up until 19 years of age as children. So for a start, a large proportion of the 17 to 19-year-olds in the United States that are killed in violent confrontations involving firearms are young adults that have chosen to involve themselves in gun-related or criminal activities.
Mhm.
They are no longer children. And as far as I know, in America, you can get a driver's license at 16, you can buy a car at 16, you can join the armed forces at 18, and you can vote at 18. How does that make you a child? So, and the vast majority of the stats of people, of children killed in America by guns are in that 17 to 19-year-old age group. Now, this is the type of thing that people need to be taking them on about with regard to their stats.
Can I speak to that real quick?
Yeah,
There's a couple different things. In the United States, we have something, a legal term called the age of majority. And at 18, in like 48 of the 50 states, the legal age of majority is 18, of which you cross that legal barrier to become officially an adult. So that's just a lie right out of the gate with the way they're doing that. And the other thing is a personal anecdote, and that is when I was regional manager for the American Red Cross, I'm sitting at a conference and I'm reading a book, a really good book called Glock: Rise of the American Handgun, which is fantastic, by the way. And this lovely young, lovely older black lady walks up to me and she said, "Oh, what are you reading, Rich?" And I said, I showed it to her, and she said, "Yeah, both of my sons were killed by Glocks." And I'm like, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry." And she said, "Yeah, I've spoke at the White House about gun violence and blah, blah, blah. And I'm an advocate, yada, yada." And I'm like, okay. And so I looked into her and her two sons. One was shot by the police committing an armed robbery. So that young man was killed by a Glock in the commission of a felony, a violent felony. The other one was killed by another gang member by a Glock. So that they were in Chicago. And I'm like, okay, the narrative falls apart. I no longer have the pity that I may have given you. The empathy just completely melted away.
Yeah. That is a very interesting anecdote. I also wanted to just talk about something else, and I would really like to encourage the people that follow you to go and look at this review and maybe pick out some stuff out of it that it's useful to them or that resonates with them. But one of the things I wrote about, and I think this is a good preface for this discussion, is it's on firearms in society. And this is my view. It's two or three short paragraphs. Firearms are a necessary and intrinsic element of a civilized society. They're used to protect our leaders and our municipal, metropolitan, state, and federal property, and to enforce the rule of law. No court order would carry the full weight of the judiciary if it were not backed up by a public official carrying a gun. Our borders and safety in relation to foreign threats are secured by guns. Armed response and security services used by many private persons would be lawful if they were not armed. For private people, a gun is often the only thing between them and their loved ones and a criminal intent on doing deadly harm. In the best police forces in the world, there is simply little chance that the police can arrive in time to save a life in a deadly attack. There's a dual obligation on citizens and government alike. Citizens must behave responsibly with guns and not spontaneously oppose common sense measures that keep guns out of juvenile and criminal hands, while the state has a duty to not overreach when framing legislation, and a further obligation to eschew irrational positions on firearm ownership, effectively punishing law-abiding gun owners while being useless at controlling real criminals. And that's a position that I have and that I push a lot in South Africa in similar discussions. But there is a two-sided story, and certainly gun owners and the pro-gun fraternity must also play their role in terms of being very responsible around firearms. Because let's face it, there are people in America, in South Africa, who should not have guns. There are people that have proven themselves incapable of managing something like that. The same as some of them shouldn't be driving automobiles either.
Jonathan, let me. We had a shooting here a week or so ago. The video footage just came out of Houston, Texas, and it was a daylight home invasion in a wealthy part of town. The responding officers arrive. They rescue the mother and her children, and there's a gunfight inside the house when the dirt bag that was caught who had just shot the police officer responding, he was wearing an ankle monitor. Now, I bring that up because this is someone who should not have been out on the street. Obviously,
Yeah.
the ankle monitor meant nothing. So, and to your point, the woman and her children were unarmed when 3 armed Hispanic males rolled into her house in broad daylight and committed this violent home invasion. So, I mean, I think that speaks to your point about, when seconds matter, law enforcement is minutes away. And especially in your country where you live, I understand that police response may not be just minutes away. It may be much longer.
A long time, much longer.
Yeah.
In the best cities, I just want to fetch a document here.
Of course.
In the best cities in South Africa, we're lucky if we see a 30-minute response. In others, no response. It's just, it might be hours away, or there is one patrol vehicle serving an area of hundreds of square kilometers. But we've got a new Minister of Police, and he is a breath of fresh air. He's making some differences.
Jonathan, you mentioned, I like where you were going with that, because you talked about the government's role, and you talked about those of us that are in the fraternity of firearms, what have you. We both have a role to play. So that is my next question. Is there a middle road between, common sense, the Second Amendment, and the government? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, first of all, at the outset, we have to accept that that anti-gun ideology is alive and well in the United States and in South Africa. At the moment, it's a little bit quiet in South Africa, but it's certainly, looking at what's going on in the US at the moment, the anti-gun ideology is very much alive. And perhaps some of the reasons why anti-gun ideology can find an ear in the government and the public is issues like school shootings. I think if there's any issue that captures the attention of people more than any other, it is the killing of children. And there is I think, a middle line to be steered between the Second Amendment concept or precept that everyone has the right to keep and bear arms under all circumstances, versus the common sense around people who should never get their hands on a gun. And so I'm suggesting, Richard, there's a middle road. And let me start off by sketching a situation. Everybody should be able to choose whether or not to own a gun scenario. For people, because I can understand, I can tell you now that if I was an American citizen and I had the Second Amendment, I would cherish that Second Amendment, and I would do whatever I could legally to defend it. So, and once I've been given a right like that, I can understand how that right is cherished as much as it is. And I think that it should be cherished. But let's start off by sketching a scenario. A mentally unstable person with a history of behavioral issues purchases, as he can in many states in the US, a subcompact 9mm pistol, decides for whatever reason he's going to end his life, chooses the parking area at the local mall, sits in his car, loaded gun on his lap. Your wife and kids arrive at the mall, park next to him. He rolls down the window and empties the clip of ammunition into their car. End of scenario. My point is that not everyone is qualified to own or access a firearm, and that there must be some way where people that are experiencing or exhibiting behavioral issues can be dealt with around that time. So I'm not advocating for something that puts the hands in government of deciding in the general population who gets guns and who doesn't. And it's normal people. But when you step out of the norms of civilized society and you start behaving badly, I think that you should be able to be flagged and say, you shouldn't have a gun. I've done it. I've done it with, I know of people in South Africa that have applied for a permit to own a firearm. and I'm aware that they are drug dealers or that they're otherwise unsuited to own a firearm, I've made a point of reporting it to the police in writing. If I have students that have come through my academy, and during the training I have observed things in them that disturbs me, even though they pass the proficiency requirements for the course, nothing has stopped me from actually drafting a letter to the local firearms officer at the local police station and to his seniors and say, this person does not, under any circumstances, carry my recommendation for owning a firearm. And I believe that that's the type of thing that we could do.
I'm going to push back on that one, Jonathan, because we have seen the abuse of red flag laws here in the United States. So I would really push back against that because they are being abused in other countries. I was recently in Northern Ireland, and having a conversation with some shooters over there, and they were like, "Don't let it happen," because they have the what is it, the National Institute, or they have the universal health care. And he said, they know that. Yeah, they know that they know you're a gun owner, and they're going to ask you all these mental health related questions. And he said, at any little thing, they're pulling your gun. So, I think we see it misused more often than not.
Yeah. So I can agree with you, and I've gone down the road of trying to analyze it from both sides, and particularly knowing where I'm coming from as well. So if you look at something like the red flag laws, what militates against it? Simply a mistrust of authorities who abuse their powers in overreaching with stupid laws and regulations, or the way that they apply the law. So a good example would be the magazine capacity law in California. Absolutely ridiculous. It messes everybody around with sport shooting. It doesn't add anything to the safety of any of the communities, and it's completely ignored by criminals. So why should law-abiding gun owners be messed around in their sport in the way that they can defend themselves, and criminals will carry on doing what they want to do? Also, you have governments and authorities sowing misinformation and misusing federal agencies to sometimes selectively enforce those laws. And
we see that here in America. Lawfare right now with President Trump.
And sowing misinformation like we see with this U.S. Surgeon General's report. So I understand that those are some of the things that militate.
Now let me agree with you on one thing. If Mike and I were teaching a course and someone came in and they're like, and they were being overtly like, they're giving a very specific threat. Why are you getting training today, Carl? And Carl says, well, I'm gonna shoot the local judge in town. I'm like, okay. Then that I agree with that. But just let me give you a vignette. And this is somebody that is in the community that you and I speak of, and someone that everybody watching today would know. There was a crazy ex-husband who knew that this person was a shooter, and that's how he made his livelihood. And this crazy ex-husband went and told the judge a bunch of crap, and the judge put out a restraining order. And on the form, there was a thing, make the person surrender the firearms. And thank God the judge did not check that. But had he, that would have been able to do it. So I haven't seen, maybe there's good legislation out there for red flag laws that we can all get behind, but currently I've not seen that.
Now I tend to agree with you on that. One of the things that I would raise just in this context, though, is if you take the Appalachia High School shooting in Georgia in September, the youngster Colt Gray, who shot and killed a number of his classmates. That was in September of this year. In July of 23, the FBI flagged to the local sheriff the fact that this youngster had been making threats on social media. And the family was interviewed in July of 2023. And nothing more came of it. There's a section in my critical review which explores why the sheriffs and the law enforcement agencies are sometimes reticent to act. And
Mhm.
there are about 12 reasons. There are 12 good reasons, and some of them very specific. But what also came out was that in December of 2023, after that, 6 months after that, his father presented this youngster with an AR-15 for Christmas.
Mhm. Mhm.
And then on the morning of the
Grossly
shooting,
irresponsible, grossly
yeah,
inappropriate, grossly irresponsible, which is why he's being tried now
yeah,
for
yeah,
the murders as
yeah.
well.
And on the morning of the shooting, the mother phoned the school and tried for about more than 30 minutes to get some reaction, to get this child attended to and have somebody see what he was doing before he
Mhm.
started shooting. And she just couldn't get a response. So the community was failed on a number of levels
Mhm.
by the authorities, and by the family and by people who knew this youngster, and by his own parents. Um, so, in circumstances like that, and I can't claim to know in Georgia or not whether there was a red flag law in place, but if one of my children were killed in that school, as
Mhm.
much of a gun owner as I am, I would probably have been grateful to have that not happen. And even if it meant that there was a red flag law in place where that that child was banned from having any contact with guns, and if the adults around him were behaving in the same way, that they also were denied the opportunity. In South Africa, we call it a privilege.
Mhm.
We unfortunately can't call our ownership of guns in this country a right because we don't have a Second Amendment. It's a privilege here. So yeah, those are the issues, and that's what I'm speaking to when I say we can defend this, and we ought to defend this ability for private people to own guns to the absolute end. But we also need to understand the responsibility that comes with it, and that responsibility also means there's also an obligation for you to get involved as a member of the community and within your own family to stop things like that happening if you can.
Yeah, let me get to Dr. Fuller's comment here. And Jonathan, do you know Dr. Fuller?
I don't.
Retired FBI agent. He says, in the scenario Rich is discussing, we see another consistent problem. There is never any kind of penalty attached for spurious claims. One can say pretty much anything, and there are no repercussions for simple lies. Yet, based on that, the government is then able to obviate the constitutional requirements surrounding due process, the 14th Amendment, and seize property, the Fourth Amendment, and deprive a person of their firearms, the Second Amendment. It is an absolute mess. And yeah, like Tony points out, here in America, it is a God-given right to own firearms. So, to your point, I am reticent to say or do anything that would infringe upon those rights. And to the point of school shootings, part of the thing that the left tends to do in our country, or the anti-gun community, I'm going to use the left because they tend to be,
Yeah,
that's part of their
yeah,
party platform, is they use the school shootings because it's such an emotional pull. I have four
yeah,
children. I get it. However, on average, each year, 8 faculty or students are killed in American schools in the conduct of mass shootings. 8. And it's a tragedy. It's sensational. It captivates the news for
yeah,
days, if not weeks on end. And in reality, the third leading cause of death is medical malpractice. It's as if there's a loaded 747 slamming into a mountain a couple of times a day, every single day,
yeah.
and nobody talks about it. So I just, it's tragic. And Mike and I proposed a solution, and we outlined it in a document that we published. So, and it doesn't infringe on anyone's rights. It doesn't take away anything. And this is a good, workable, solid solution that is very, very, very inexpensive to the American taxpayer.
And what was that? Is there time to chat about it?
Yeah, of course. The basic outline of it is incredibly simple. We don't make these gun-free zones. We have very few gun-free zones in America where I cannot carry a firearm, right?
Yeah,
I'm disenfranchised and I'm a
yeah,
law-abiding citizen, so I will follow it,
yeah,
whereas somebody who's intent upon doing harm will not. So,
yeah.
having said that, we have a program in America called the FFDO program. You familiar with this, Jonathan? Federal
Say
Flight
that
Deck.
again.
Yeah, it's the Federal Flight Deck Officer Program. It's where we train and arm commercial pilots. It was a kind of an intermediate step before we could get FAMs, the Federal Air Marshals, and enough
Yes,
planes. So those FFDOs are out there. You don't know who they are. You don't know where they are, and they're. And I would say we arm a select number of teachers, not all of them, but we have some
yeah,
coaches that are very
yeah,
competent, capable
yeah,
men and
yeah,
women who
yeah,
can pass a TSSCI background investigation. We
yeah,
check everything about them. We put them on the human reliability program. We train them because we have the summer to do that. So every summer they would go back for mandatory training,
yeah,
and we arm them, and no shooter would know who they are.
yeah,
And I think that's the way to do it. It's what Israel did, and it seemed to work.
yeah. I think that's an excellent thing. Um, it wasn't in my bio because it's not really relevant here, but I spent quite a bit of time in risk management, setting up risk management programs for families and companies, and from big commercial organizations to a wealthy family. And it was exactly on that type of principle in terms of hardening the exterior, hardening the target, and creating in the mind of the criminal, of the violent criminal, the doubt as to whether he is going to encounter somebody there who's armed and competent or not. And they are cowards generally, and they will go. Where will they go? They're going to go to gun-free zones. And we have a number of shopping centers in South Africa that stupidly um, call themselves gun-free zones. I refuse to go there.
Mhm.
I just won't go. If my firearm is not welcome, I'll just find some other way to work around it, even if I have to send somebody there to get what I want.
Agreed.
And yeah, I think that's an excellent way to deal with it. And if the authorities are showing that they can't be trusted to manage this stuff properly, then unfortunately, as Americans are fond of saying, you are going to break a few eggs to make an omelet. Um, and it's one of those things.
Well, let's
I
circle
think,
back to your paper, Jonathan, if I could,
yeah,
because I think this speaks to what we're talking about, and that is if the U.S. Surgeon General is going to mislead the public
yeah,
the way they have with this report, then
yeah,
again, it harms the trust in that same government, does it not?
completely. And I think just before I go into some more detail on the report, I wanted to just finish off, I think, on this sort of mini chat around the red flag laws and society in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I wanted to say that finally, apart from hunting and sport shooting, America, which was once viewed by me as a highly organized, productive, cohesive, and patriotic nation, appears to be devolving at the hands of woke idiots into a dangerous place where there is less and less respect for honesty, public order, and the rule of law. Personally, I've been shocked by the video material that I have seen of the lawlessness in cities like San Francisco that I knew once as pristine, beautiful, and safe places, and the emergence of openly anti-government, that is anti-US nation sentiment and propaganda, which in many countries in the world would be regarded as treasonous calls to bring the country to its knees. All this while law-abiding people with family values, who still comprise the bulk of Americans, are watching it unfold. And that's not unusual. We have the same thing in South Africa. I have very little support from the people in this country that own guns because they don't perceive this ideological position of our government as an immediate threat. And that, unfortunately, is just the nature of the beast with communities. They won't do anything until it is a very, very urgent threat. So in the United States, in the circumstances, law-abiding gun owners ought to, at small community level, stand together, train together, hold each other accountable for competence and safe gun handling, including the safekeeping of firearms from children and criminals, but really stand together in terms of creating a cohesive community and looking after each other. The communities, and I'm 65 years old, so I grew up my community where I grew up as a youngster, primary school youngster, is the same as an American growing up in 1965. There, it was the same type of environment. You could go out and play at night or the whole day. The only rule was be in the door by the time it's dark. That's it. Go ride your bicycle, ride your horse, do whatever you want to. And children and families just can't live like that anymore. And I think it's critical that ordinary Americans, ordinary South Africans work to get their communities back, and underpinning all of that, underpinning that safety in the home, is the ability of the adults in the home, the mother, the father, and even the teenagers who are competent in handling firearms, to be able to protect themselves and their family from criminals.
I think part of you mentioned, and Dr. Fuller says devolving accurately, if euphemistically stated. And I think we see this, Daniel Penny, I don't know if you know that, he's a former Marine. He's riding on a subway train in New York. Somebody is attacking people. He puts that person in a chokehold, and that person dies. And
Yes.
to me, we're here in America, part of the devolving is we're attacking and criminalizing the good Samaritans that are trying to protect people from harm, instead of attacking the criminal. And I think stuff like that leads to the slow, steady decline that we see here in America.
Yeah, we have it. We have it in this country too. And to the extent that I teach my students, and it's probably a good thing, even if you were in the United States, and I've said this on your show before, if you are facing a criminal, somebody intent on doing you deadly harm, if you can get out of it, if you can sacrifice your ego and your pride, and you can run away from it, run. But you're going to run for 5 minutes, and that will be the end of it. You may well be justified in shooting that person, but you're going to be spending how many days and hours in the next week and the next month in police stations and in courts and in all sorts of stuff, and spending tens of thousands of dollars with attorneys. In this country, hundreds of thousands of rands. One of my lead instructors shot and killed somebody that was attacking him with a paving brick in 2018. He spent 5 years laboring under a charge of murder. 5 years that he wasn't allowed access to a firearm. At the end of it, he was found not guilty. He is sitting with a 450,000 rand legal bill. During the 5 years, his wife couldn't take it. She committed suicide. He lost 2 jobs. And it was that split-second decision to kill the man that was attacking him, where maybe there was an opportunity for him to run away from it. So it's a serious thing. Yeah.
No, that's a great point. And we obviously talk about that a lot. That's why we, talk about awareness and avoidance and the legal things.
Yeah.
We've been doing that for 10 years. What I will say is, that sounds good for you and I. We're still reasonably fit middle-aged men. But I think on the subway is a great example. Yeah. He's assaulting women. They can't run. There's nowhere to go. They're on a moving subway. The thing that he did, I mean, it's unfortunate that someone died, but at the same time, that was not the intent to kill that man. The intent was to subdue him and for lawful and legal arrest, and it didn't work out. But the fact that they're criminalizing that behavior sets a strong message to every other good American citizen out there that that will not be tolerated.
Yeah, it certainly does. And I've already in this interview taken a swipe at the woke agenda. It's enough said on that account. So I think that we need to be alive to the rhetoric that is used by the anti-gun establishment, by the people who would seek to disarm lawfully armed citizens. And I ask a question in this review of mine, and the question says, what is gun violence, and why do guns, in their definition, have a special place over knives and other deadly weapons? I went to the internet, where most of us go, and inserted the search term knife violence definition into the Google search engine. It yielded 11 responses on the first blush, with only the first response addressing knife violence. The remaining 10 refer specifically to knife crime. So my question is, why is death from stabbing a crime, yet death from a firearm is violence? And the definition of violence in the Oxford Dictionary is its behavior involving physical force intended to hurt, damage, or kill someone or something. For example, violence erupted in protest marches. The KFF poll, which is the underlying document that the US Surgeon General relies on, more especially after being adopted word for word, ought to have been subjected to an appropriate inquiry into the definition of this term firearm violence, and at the least, the incidences of suicide, which accounts for about half of all US homicides, so-called homicide statistics, and accidental injury and death, ought to be stripped out of the statistics that are in any way associated with the term violence. And so what I'm saying is that if somebody commits suicide, we know that most people commit suicide in private, and they might hang themselves, they might take pills, or they might shoot themselves, or they might slit their wrists. It's essentially a private act, and it's not a violent act in the community. And they are ending their lives, but it's not violence against other people. Right. Okay, and we can have a long discussion about whether suicide is justified or not. My personal view on that is, actually, you know what? I think it's a personal thing. If you've had enough, and you can make peace with what you're going to leave behind you for the people that love you, that's your decision. But it's not a violent act. Guns apparently also have their own unique link with violence. So, and that is homicides is a deliberate act of killing another person with a firearm, but a suicide using a firearm to take one's own life, we've spoken about now, but evidently, Rich, taking an overdose is not labeled pill violence. Mm-hmm. Killing yourself with a rope is not labeled hanging violence. And the accidental shootings with firearms are also counted into these statistics of gun violence. And if it's an accident, how can it be called something violent? Violence is a premeditated thing. So we need to be alive to the rhetoric that these people use. The media also, and the government, and even the police will talk about the shooter. These people that take guns into schools or to public venues and shoot other people are not shooters. They're murderers. I'm a shooter. Every single day of my life, I'm a shooter. You too. We need to start calling them murderers. Even if he's 16 years old, he needs to be called what he is. He's a murderer. He's not a shooter. So I think that's quite important. And we're getting too close to probably another 10 minutes or so. So I'm happy to throw it open if you've got other questions. There are a lot of stuff that one could drill down into in this critical review. I'm hoping, I wish that it would get, and I've tried to people that have got contacts with US senators and so on, of the senators from the right side of the House. to get it into President Trump's hands, because he's regularly debating the gun issue with Kamala Harris. And I think if he could say to them and just show to them, you know what, you guys have been caught lying. You have been caught with a massive fraud on the American public, and you've been caught lying. And this just illustrates, and it completely exposes your anti-gun agenda. So I would love somebody to put it in President Trump's hands, or get it into the hands of his team at least.
Well, we'll certainly see what we can do, Jonathan. I'm going to have that full PDF critique, point counterpoint that Jonathan has put together. It's amazingly well done. I'll have that for you, as well as Jonathan's YouTube analysis that he did on his show. For you guys, it'll be in today's show notes after the show airs. But I also want to say that, Dr. Fuller says, I love the fact that you are specific and calculated in your definitions and your use of particular terms. We need to see a lot more of that. And that's where the left really goes full on George Orwell, 1984, with controlling the language. And like you said, the idea of, I'm going to air quote it because I would never use that term, gun violence. I don't even know what that means. I know what they want it to mean, but I reject that term just as you did. When somebody, how many terrorists around the world have rented a truck and plowed into people and killed? I mean, in France, it was like, what, 80 something people were mowed down?
86 people and more than 450 injured with a truck.
Yeah. Do we call that rented truck violence? I mean, it's absolutely absurd. And it shouldn't be tolerated by the right. But unfortunately, a lot of the pushback I wish they would do, they don't do. And I don't understand why they're letting the left control that narrative.
Yeah. Well, it's a case, I think, of being prepared to be unpopular. And I heard a wonderful quote a while ago. I can't remember. It was by somebody famous and clever. But he said that if you have made some enemies in your life, it's a good thing, because it means you've stood up for something that you believe in.
Agreed.
And I'm prepared to make enemies. I don't care who I piss off, to say the right things, and to defend the right views, quite frankly.
Yeah. Dr. Fuller says the truck used in France had 6 tires, ban high tire capacity trucks.
Yeah.
It's that's ridiculous, is it not?
Yeah. They were talking about banning, of course, that fairy prime minister in Canada now wants to ban knives as well.
Yeah, and it doesn't end, as you and I know, once they start going. That's why I'm really reticent to trust the left when they say common sense gun control. I refuse to believe it, because we've seen that term misused in 150 of the 200 countries out there.
But rich people people that have got the view of doing this need to take control of these environments, and we need to change to stay the same. If we don't change, this laissez-faire attitude of watching things unfold, it gets too late. It's like a frog sitting in a pot of slowly heating water. By the time you realize that it's too hot, you're getting burnt to death.
Well, that's why there's got to be lines in the sand. And, Mark is on this morning from Australia, and, they lost their right because of one shooting, I think, in Tasmania, and they lost their rights, and New Zealand had theirs. But they don't talk about is the dismal failure of that mandatory buyback that New Zealand had. I read somewhere like the 18% of what they thought was going to get turned in got turned in. So good on the New Zealand gun owners for that. Let me ask you a question. This is a bit off the topic, Jonathan, but I'd be remiss if I didn't, now that you're here on the show, because I know that you're a fan of the 45th president, hopefully the 47th president. Do you think Trump will be allowed to win?
I think if they have any choice in not allowing him to win, then they're going to do whatever they can. I can't see that the Trump supporters, the red-blooded Americans, the anti-woke Americans will allow it to happen. I'm actually quite apprehensive as to what would happen if he doesn't win, because the suspicion will be there that it's been manipulated. And this is something else that gobsmacks me, is that I hear this debate about should people that can't produce IDs be allowed to vote. How on earth do you get to vote in a country if you're not a citizen?
It's illegal for them to ask you about your ID in California to vote. Isn't that absurd?
It is the most fundamental right and obligation of a citizen of a country to vote. How can somebody that has got no emotional and cultural connection to the citizens of that country be allowed to come in there and cast a vote, even as to whether there should be parking meters at the library, never mind for a president?
There's a couple things that if I could have just a couple more moments of your time, there's some great stuff coming in. Will Parker says the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. Don says our media is part of the action arm of the left. They write the narratives and recite them on the airwaves. The drive, the verbiage, the word selection, etc. Mark over there in Australia says, if we remember our history, the Germans found it was much easier to get people into cattle cars when they were disarmed. This is an interesting one. Steve says a friend in Italy filed for a knife carry permit and has been waiting 2 years. And this is an important one. And I haven't talked about this on the show because it's new. My brother Jeff, who's on this morning, told me about it. The new DOD directive, and I'm going to try to get up here so people can read about it. Have you heard about this? It just come out. Okay, this is going to be crazy. Has anyone seen DOD Directive 5240.01 dated 27 September? And Don says, sadly, yes. And he's given us a link here if you want to check it out. But the U.S. military is now authorized to use lethal force on U.S. soil, which is a departure from posse comitatus and a million other things. And it was quietly changed. Every year or every several years, this thing is updated and revised and republished. And it's just a simple administrative kick out. But if you read it, it's very clear that in conjunction with U.S. law enforcement, they can fire on U.S. citizens. And I'm like, whoa, what in the hell are we doing here? Dr. Fuller says there will be violence in this country if Trump wins or if he loses. One side of the issue is going to hit the streets with rocks and bottles either way.
So that's I think that's where we are. But
on another note, Jonathan, you could fly here, land in LA, vote for President Trump, and fly back to South Africa if you wanted to. Nobody's going to ask for your ID.
I would do it with pleasure, but I don't. I would bankrupt myself at the gun stores.
I hear you.
Yeah.
Where can people find you and follow you, Jonathan?
I actually have a YouTube channel called King of Spades on YouTube, and if they Google King of Spades on YouTube, it's there. I just used it as a channel name, and I've been very remiss in putting out regular stuff, because we all know that the YouTube algorithm looks for regular posts if you want to build up a following. But I'm inclined to be quite verbal. There've been some good videos and stuff out there. I've hit sort of 20 and 30,000 views with one or two of them, which is not bad for a new channel. But I'd like to have be on your show a bit more regularly as well. I think we've got lots to talk about.
I agree, and let's do it again. I want to touch on Will Parker. He said, I just returned from my last trip until I know it's safe to travel again. As did I. Spent a lot of time traveling this year, both domestically and internationally. And I have cleared my books of travel until after I see what's going to go on with this election, because it's just too weird right now. I will say that here in Tennessee, we went and voted yesterday, and the lines were hundreds of meters long, and they said that they have shattered the early voting records here in Cumberland County. And of course, it was just a wave of Trump flags. But that's
Good.
but
Yeah.
that's here. That's rural East Tennessee. I'm not surprised by
Yeah.
that. I don't know what's going on around the country though.
Yeah. Well, Rich, it's been great chatting with you. I hope that document resonates with the people, and I would love to hear from them with any questions, any ideas, and I would be absolutely delighted to see President Trump use it in his election campaign, even if he just takes one swipe at them like he does so well and say, "You all been caught lying." The other is that I hope we're all going to enjoy seeing him elected. He deserves it. He's got the courage of his convictions.
Do I have 2 more minutes with you, Jonathan?
Yeah, I'm
Okay.
available as much time as you've got.
Well, let me ask you this: how did you take the assassination attempt, the original one, the one in Pennsylvania before the second one? What were your thoughts on that?
Yeah, there were an enormous amount of red flags for me immediately around that child that was held up as cannon fodder, as having planned it and done it. And it was absolutely clear to me that it was manipulated, and that that kid was cannon fodder. He was nothing more than that.
Is anybody trying to assassinate Cyril Ramaphosa in your country?
No. Yeah, we've had assassinations decades ago in this country, but of white leaders, and certainly there's political assassinations here on a daily basis. But nobody has gone for President Ramaphosa. He's well protected, very well protected.
Well, ours should be too, with the money that we put into the
Secret
Service.
Yeah. And I've been amazed that there was a second attempt on President Trump, and I think one can rest assured. I hope that his safety is not just in the hands of the Secret Service, and I'm not taking anything away from the trained and passionate and professional Secret Service agents. I've met a number of them in my time in the United States and when I was in the commercial security industry. Highly trained, highly professional people. And what we saw at the first assassination attempt, it was in Butler, was definitely not the level of the Secret Service that I'm used to seeing.
No, and for those that don't know, online you can find photos of Jonathan in the Oval Office with President Obama, I believe, right?
Yeah, we took that out of my bio for this show, Rich, because at the time that I went in there, it was a great honor. I knew it was a once in a lifetime moment. There are not a lot of people in the world that make it into the Oval Office. But let's just say that President Obama and I don't sit around the same table when it comes to guns.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, it is. You got to respect the office, whether you like the man or not. And I think that's what you were doing. Michael Gentili says, at my polling place yesterday, I saw a car with California plates and a Trump sticker, anecdotal, but representative of what is happening in Franklin, Tennessee. Yeah. And I see that as well. We talked about that yesterday. The prices, the real estate prices in Tennessee have quadrupled in a lot of places, not because Tennesseans are buying homes, but because of the influx to our free state from other left states.
Yeah.
And is that something unique to the United States? Do you have that in South Africa, Jonathan?
We do. I live in a province called the Western Cape, and we're at the tip of Africa. Everything in our province is at a higher level. The municipal services, law enforcement, education, hospitals, local government, and the prices of houses and property in Cape Town are double, at least, or if not more, what they are in Johannesburg. And so people are fleeing cities like Johannesburg, which is devolving like I like San Francisco and Los Angeles. Yeah.
Well, Jonathan, thank you for being on today. Guys, check out the PDF Jonathan has released. It's entitled A Critical Review of the Public Health Crisis in America, and that's part of Jonathan's Safe Citizen campaign, building hope for law-abiding citizens. Check out Jonathan on his YouTube channel, King of Spades. You will not be disappointed. He's got some amazing content over there. And Jonathan, let's do it again soon, my friend.
Thank you so much. And do me a great favor and say hello to Mike when you see him.
I'll give him a big hug and a smooch on the cheek.
Thank you.
Guys out there in Warrior Nation, well, God bless and stay safe.